Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning into one of these streams, we're here streaming every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST. Wednesdays at 6 p.m. PST. Today we're doing a Kung Pao chicken that's based off of a recipe hack that I had written. That was a couple months ago now. I think that was back in October or November or so. That was part of a larger series that I've been doing where I've been hacking a lot of the iconic dishes that come from the Panda Express menu and the PF Chang's menu, stuff like that. Things that come from really, really iconic and straight ahead Chinese American foods. And then sort of seeing what it looks like if we try to make those dishes not so Americanized, and so sort of incorporating a couple of like traditional Chinese elements into those like really, really Americanized dishes. So things like Kung Pao chicken, General Tso's chicken, honey sesame chicken, stuff like that. That series is super fun because a lot of those dishes that you get at Panda Express are not things that actually come from Chinese food. They're pretty much just American food. So this one includes well, Kung Pao chicken is sort of Chinese. It's kind of not though. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely hop over to the YouTube. That's where that series lives. Those videos, they always come up every Friday. So the most recent one, actually the video we did last Friday, so the one that came out a couple of days ago, is also part of that hack series where I hacked the popcorn chicken from a Taiwanese pearl milk tea shop that you find a lot here in the States called Quickly. So lots of fun stuff like that popping up over on the YouTube channel, so if you haven't hopped over to the YouTube, definitely check out what's going on over there. Those videos, the recipe videos, they come up every Friday, and that's also where the concurrent live stream lives. So you can see the laptop behind me, that one goes to YouTube, and that one's always super fun to do if you haven't checked that out yet. Oh yeah, Cobb Nugget, yeah, oh you finally remembered to follow, yeah, cool, thank you for tuning in. Yeah. Delaware Smash, yeah, thank you. Hello everyone. Welcome back. Always super fun to see so many people like tuning in all over and over again. It's pretty cool. It's a violin day, yeah. Some of the tracks have violin on them. Yeah, at least one of the tracks have violin on them. More of the Trace Beat stuff has violin on it. Definitely. Cool. So I'm starting off, this is my garlic and ginger. So if you've ever watched one of these streams before, anyone who has watched one of these streams before will tell you that pretty much every dish that I make, the first two things that I do are always going to be garlic and ginger. They come up a lot in a lot of Chinese cooking because anytime that you're working with flavors of umami, they will end up being the very first two things that we work with because they work well as like the baseline layer of umami. So everything that we're going to be building on top of it is going to lead to the like complexity of flavor that we're trying to build out. But it's going to start with our aromatics. So we're going to add these two first ingredients into the wok very, very first, and that's going to be where we start. So sort of like the foundation that you build your castle on starts with garlic and ginger. Super, super often. Try not to do that. So it is actually not because we want everything to taste like garlic and ginger, although very, very often in Chinese food, everything tastes like garlic and ginger. But it's actually not supposed to. It's not meant for that. What it's really intended to do is just sort of start us off from like where we're going to start building umami. It's going to start with these first two ingredients. So for our garlic, I'm just giving that a crush, and then we just sliced it up. You don't really need to do too much more than that for your garlic. But for ginger, ginger is a pretty durable root veggie, which means that we actually do have to do some work to make sure that this stuff comes apart. Otherwise, it will definitely not come apart in the wok fry. Yeah. So that means that for our ginger, we actually do have to do the fine minces. So if you are particularly averse to doing fine minces, you can also, of course, use a microplane and then just grate this stuff straight into the wok. I hate doing that because then you got to clean the stupid microplane, which is by far the most annoying thing to clean in the kitchen because it has so many little holes. And that ought to do it. So that's our first two ingredients. We're going to set these aside, and they're going to go in very, very first with our wok fry. Kung Pao chicken has many, many things in it, so this is going to be the first of many things, I suppose. Cool. You started doing all of your chopping and slicing before cooking. Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, yeah. And the spoon trick is the spoon trick is one of my favorites. So the process of the reason, so I guess we should talk about that. The reason that you very, very often, if you've ever watched one of these streams before, you'll know that the first thing, probably the first half hour or so of everything that I do before we start cooking is always chopping stuff. So pretty much everything that doesn't involve cooking on heat has to be done first. So if you ever study French cooking, that's very, very, very common in French cooking. We call it mise en place, or everything in its place, which is essentially getting everything that doesn't require heat done first. So that makes sure that when you do start working on heat, we're not going to be doing stuff like chopping or cooking rice or like mixing sauces, anything that doesn't require heat. We want all of that done first so that we don't have to, we're not like just super distracted by making sure that the onions are cut properly while we're trying to cook the garlic and ginger, because if you're distracted by other things while it's cooking, you're very, very likely going to end up burning something. So I always say probably the most important thing in any kitchen, probably second to the knife, is having a lot of bowls. Bowls are very, very useful so that you can chop stuff ahead of time and then set it aside. It's a particularly important technique to keep in mind in Chinese cooking, because in Chinese cooking, especially in wok cooking, because a wok is so hot, everything is going to happen really, really quickly. So you'll find out as soon as we start cooking. But as soon as we have something in the wok, pretty much the rest of the dish is going to come together within like a couple of minutes. Probably the wok fry portion of a wok fry only takes, I don't know, like 5 minutes, maybe a little bit more than that, but not really more than 5 minutes though. And that's because it's happening on such high heat that everything is going to cook so fast. So if you don't have everything done already, you're very, very likely going to either overcook something or undercook something, or probably just generally mess something up. So super, super good idea, especially with Chinese wok cooking. Make sure that all of this chopping is done before you start cooking. Hermina, yeah, how's it going? Yeah. Cool. Alright, so for our veggies, so if you've ever made a Kung Pao chicken before, or if you've ever had a Kung Pao chicken before, you'll know that there is not really a specific set of ingredients that goes into a Kung Pao chicken. It's really, the more that you dig into it, the more that you'll realize is that it's essentially just a big vegetable stir fry with chicken in it, which means that you can throw whatever you have into it. So right now, I actually following pretty closely the original recipe at this point. But the veggies that we're using today, this is going to be some onions, bell pepper, and then this is a zucchini. But very, very often I will vary what goes into my Kung Pao chicken depending on what I have. So if I don't have a zucchini super often, I might substitute that with a carrot. If I don't have a carrot, then I might maybe use celery. Celery is a good filler if you're running low on certain veggies. So this in particular, this case, I actually happen to have a zucchini, but it is slightly going. But I actually do happen to have everything that goes into this recipe today, so that's pretty useful. So that's our zucchini. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, all about the prep for sure. Yeah, you put everything in deli containers. Yeah, that's a good idea too. So that's another good solution to like meal prep. And that's basically the reason why, like, very often if you go to a restaurant, like there will be like chefs in the kitchen at like 3 o'clock, but they maybe don't open for dinner service until like 6 o'clock. And that's because they're there for the first couple of hours just doing like prep work. So they're just like chopping onions, making rice, stuff like that. All of the prep work, they're doing all of that prep work beforehand, and that's how, especially in Chinese restaurants, that's how they can pump out dishes so fast, is because they're not doing any chopping. All of the onions are cut before the restaurant even opens. So that's also the reason why, if you've ever been to like brunch plus dinner restaurants, so like Very, very often you could go to like a brunch place which will be open from like breakfast until like late afternoon, until like 2 o'clock. And then it will be closed for a while. So it will be closed for like from like 3 till 6, and that's so that they can do the prep work for dinner. Cool. This onion is old. So right now I'm dicing up my onion here. This is a kind of an old onion, so it is a little bit peely, but that's okay. Anytime that you dice an onion, you'll notice that I'm leaving the root on. So right now I'm just chopping around the root. And then the very last thing that will be left when we finish chopping our onion is just this root. Super, super useful anytime that you're dicing to leave this root on, because the root will hold the onion together. So if you've ever tried to dice an onion and then it starts falling apart on you before you can finish dicing it, that's because you chopped the root off. So if you leave that root on, it will keep itself together, so you won't have to chop a broken onion. Alright. The last veggie that I'm going to do today, these are going to be some green onions. And these are going to be the garnishes that go on top, so I'm going to separate these. I do this a lot anytime that I work with green onions. Is I'm going to separate the greens and the whites of my green onions here. And that's because the leafy portions of a green onion, or the green part, is a little bit more delicate. So if you were to throw this leafy portion here into the wok fry, like anything else, it would absolutely fall apart. It would probably do one of two things, or maybe even both of them. It would either burn, or it would just like disappear. It would completely disappear. So in my experience, unless you're going to chop it into like really large planks, I've found that it just works a little bit better to use those greens as a garnish. Unless you don't need a garnish, then you might as well just throw it in. But anytime that I'm working with a garnish, I love saving it because it looks pretty and it has more flavor if you throw them raw. But the whites, so this portion, are very, very useful to keep and use with our aromatics. So we're going to throw 3 things into the wok today for our aromatics. This is the whites of our green onions, our ginger, and our garlic. So these will be the first 3 things that we throw into our wok. Yeah. Yeah, prep work equals mise en place. That's exactly it. Yeah, that's exactly it. Very, very useful. That was a big game changer when I figured that out, when I was like first learning how to cook. It makes a huge difference because, especially if you're trying to cook something that you've never cooked before, it makes a really big difference because a lot of times you're cooking something that's very, very unfamiliar. And if you don't know what you're doing and you're trying to do your prep work while you're also cooking, it's really, really distracting. Alright, so these are the greens of my green onions. I'm cutting them on a slight bias here so that they're holding a little bit more surface area. And that ought to do it. Did I teach myself to cook? Yeah, more or less. I learned a lot about cooking from my parents and just like watching other people cook. But for the most part, I pretty much just taught myself how to cook stuff. And then learned by doing a lot of trial and error. And mostly just like a necessity. Because I gotta eat, I guess. Yeah, but no, I did not go to school for cooking. Not a trained chef. Although I have seen trained chefs on Reddit before. There are definitely trained chefs popping up on Reddit. All right. Yeah, Sarah, do I save the roots for the green onions? I do. Although I have grown so many green onions now that I have too many green onions. So I actually started throwing them out because I have no more room to grow green onions. I have probably like close to 100 green onions in my backyard right now. That's probably too many green onions. But I've run into this problem where I actually don't know how to fix it, and maybe if there's someone on one of these chats that has more gardening experience than me. But with my green onions, every time that I regrow them, they don't seem to grow as much white portion, so it's mostly greens. And I don't know what I'm doing wrong or why my green onions are growing without the white portion, but I've tended to stop using them as much because they won't have as much of the white portion. So unless I'm trying to, like scallion pancakes, for example, I'll use them. But otherwise, you're pretty much always going to need that white portion for something. So kind of a bummer. I don't know what's going on. I'm not the greatest gardener, so yeah. All right, so for our chicken today, I'm going with chicken thigh. The original recipe that I had written, it was written as a Panda Express hack, so I was hacking the original Panda Express Kung Pao chicken, and I found that pretty much all of the Panda Express recipes that I have ever hacked, they never ever use chicken thigh. They always use chicken breast, and for a long time I could not figure out why that was. And I think there are maybe a couple of different reasons as to why you might do that in a recipe. That's just going to keep happening, by the way. This camera is going to turn off every 30 minutes. I don't know how to fix that. It's a funny camera problem. Yeah, but so the more that I've investigated Panda Express recipes, the more that I've discovered that they almost always use chicken breast. And I have a feeling that it's a marketing ploy. I think that they use chicken breast to trick people into thinking that it's healthier. And that's the main reason that they use chicken breast, trick people to think it's healthier, which is actually not at all true. The fat in chicken fat is by far not the most unhealthy thing that goes into a Kung Pao chicken. Kung Pao chicken actually, for the most part, is pretty healthy because it's mostly vegetables. But all that to say, anytime that I make Kung Pao chicken, pretty much always you're going to see me using chicken thigh because that extra fat that we're adding is going to be really useful in building out like richness to our Kung Pao chicken, because everything else that we're adding is pretty much a vegetable. So outside of those veggies, we're going to need a source of fat. Since the only source of fat that we're actually going to find here is going to be from our chicken fat. So if we were to try and do this with chicken breast, you would probably find that it would be a little bit dry and like a little bit bland because there's not enough fat going on. So very often people will say is that chicken thigh is always the right move, which is actually, I also don't agree with that. I don't think that chicken thigh is always the right move. But anytime that I'm working with a recipe that needs a little bit of extra fat, you will very frequently will see me using chicken thigh. But definitely, like when I work with things that have bacon in it already, a lot of my like bacon fried rices, they have chicken breast instead of chicken thigh. Because a lot of the fat that we're deriving comes from the bacon fat already, so you actually don't need that extra fat from the chicken, and it ends up just getting in the way a little bit. Cool. Well, that's a lot of gold. Yeah, well, thank you for all of the awards in gold. That is pretty cool. All-seeing upvote. I don't even know what that one is. That's cool. All right. So we're going to do a couple of things next. Next, we're going to do our chicken marinade followed by our sauce. I'm going to do the marinade first so that it will have as much time as possible to marinate. Very frequently when you see me doing chicken marinades, I'll do it too late and then it will marinate for maybe like 5 minutes, which is probably not going to do much. But if you really have your mind set to it, any kind of chicken, it should marinate for at least 30 minutes. I very rarely let my chicken marinate for 30 minutes because it takes too long and I don't want to do that. I don't feel like waiting. But if you're really committed to developing depth of flavor, cut your chicken as early as possible and then let it marinate. That was 4 tablespoons of soy sauce plus 2 tablespoons of Shaoxing wine. If you've never had Shaoxing wine, it's more commonly referred to as Chinese cooking wine, and I'm pretty sure is essentially just dry cooking sherry. So if you can't find Shaoxing wine, pick up some dry cooking sherry and it's basically the same thing. Although I do tell people that Shaoxing wine is almost certainly going to be cheaper than dry cooking sherry because it is insanely cheap at Chinese grocery stores. I think I got that entire bottle of Shaoxing wine. I think that was for like $2 or something. Shaoxing wine is crazy cheap, and there's no way that you'll find dry cooking sherry or any kind of sherry for that cheap. So if you can find it, get yourself some Shaoxing wine, and it's going to be a lot cheaper, and basically the same thing. So cool. That was a tablespoon of toasted sesame oil, and then 2 tablespoons of hoisin sauce, and then There's a lot of stuff in this marinade, actually. Next up is some white pepper. I want to stress how little white pepper you should be using. So this is, I want to say that's like maybe a 1/4 teaspoon of white pepper. Sometimes I use even less than that. White pepper is very, very salty, so that when you find yourself using white pepper, the reason that it's so salty is because it has MSG in it. So whenever I use white pepper, I try and be as sparse with that stuff as possible, because it is going to add quite a bit of salt. But I also think that it works really well in a marinade, so if you have it, definitely make use of it. So that's our chicken marinade. If you're really committed, this should marinate for at least 30 minutes or up to an hour. This will probably not marinate for an hour or 30 minutes. This might marinate for like 10 minutes, and it will still do enough. In the meantime, the last thing we're gonna do before we start wok cooking is our sauce. So if you've watched these streams before, you'll know that I very frequently love assembling sauces off heat. So if you've ever watched a wok chef cook in a restaurant, they will do this straight into the wok. So they'll have like an actual spoon, like a soup ladle, and they'll ladle this stuff straight into the wok, which is like, the reason that those chefs seem to do that a lot is because they're making the same thing like 40 times a day, which means those chefs are probably not even tasting the things that they're cooking anymore, because they're just doing it from muscle memory. For us, since we're not cooking the same thing 40 times a day, I find it's very useful to assemble this stuff off heat and then taste it. So we can stop, taste it, see what it needs. If it needs something, then add it. If it doesn't need it, then adjust. But super useful anytime that we're wok cooking to take advantage of as much opportunity as we can to stop and taste. Otherwise, we won't actually know what's going on, because wok cooking happens so fast. It becomes very difficult to stop and taste and adjust, because everything is happening so fast. Especially when you have raw meat elements like chicken involved, there's not really a lot of opportunity to adjust to taste. So create as much opportunity for yourself as possible by assembling the sauces off heat. That's 4 tablespoons of soy sauce plus 2 tablespoons of fish sauce, and then this is 2 tablespoons of black vinegar. I saw someone asked about honey. Yeah, any honey. Yeah, so that's a really good question, because I was actually about to talk about that, so thank you for asking for that. So very often when I hack Panda Express recipes, I find myself adding things like honey or brown sugar. And that's because super commonly in like Americanized Chinese food, there is this element where they love to add as much sugar as possible, because Americans love really sweet, savory food. So that's like a big thing in American food, is the incorporation of sweet with savory. So very often in Panda Express recipes, you'll see like things like honey sesame chicken, for example, which just has a crap load of honey. It has like, I think, a half a cup of honey when I did that hack. What I love doing when I like reassemble those recipes without the American qualities, usually what I'll do, what I find myself doing is removing all of that sugar and honey, and then replacing it with other things that come from traditional Chinese cooking. That's not necessarily sweet, but like sweet adjacent. So today we're using a couple of things. We used 2 tablespoons of hoisin sauce that was in our marinade. Hoisin sauce has a whole bunch of sugar in it. The other big source is going to come from our fish sauce, and then that black vinegar that I just added, both of which have quite a bit of sugar in it. And then I think the original Kung Pao chicken recipe that I had written, hacking the Panda Express version, had, I forget now, but I think it had like a 1/4 cup of honey in it or something like that. And this is all the way down to, I think this is going to be 1 teaspoon of brown sugar. Let's add a little more of that. And that's all of the sugar that we're going to be adding. So essentially when we're like deconstructing Chinese American food and reassembling it in like the lens of traditional Chinese food, what we're doing a lot of times, what I find myself doing is just removing sugar and then replacing it with other things. Yeah, honey helps break the salt and acid for sure, which is why I still find that you do need like some sugar. So I did like add, that was like about two teaspoons of brown sugar. Sometimes I add like almost up to like 2 or 3 teaspoons. So you do still need some sugar to contrast all of the acid that you find in a lot of Chinese food. But I don't think that you need as much sugar as you very, very frequently will find in a lot of Americanized Chinese food. Cool. Yeah, I love Panda Express. Panda Express is super tasty. And any Chinese person that tells you that they don't like Panda Express is lying. Because Panda Express is delicious. It's just like a really, really classic Americanized American food. And if we get out of the habit of referring to it as Chinese food, then people will start admitting that it's actually very tasty. It's like really good fried chicken. So I love Panda Express. And I also find it's super fascinating to take apart these dishes and take a look at what's going on in them. All right, so that's what I just added is 2 tablespoons of Chinese spicy black bean paste. So in my opinion, probably one of the most important things that goes into this Kung Pao chicken, at least, is that black bean paste, because it gives us all of that fermented umami. It's a very, very overwhelming or very, very powerful flavor, and is probably one of the more iconic or discernible flavors in this particular recipe. So I love the use of black bean sauce in a lot of stir fries like this. Last thing that I'm adding this is, let's do 2 tablespoons. I'm just going to use the rest of this jar. This is spicy chili crisp, I guess is probably the most colloquial term. In Chinese it's called lao gan ma, which is essentially, I guess, red chili flake that's fermented in oil. I guess that's what lao gan ma is. It has a very, very subtle taste to it. In my opinion, I don't think that it's actually that spicy. I think it has a very pervasive heat to it because it's covered in oil, so that oil kind of pervades through the entire dish. And that's what I love about it, is that it has a way of just spreading throughout an entire dish in a way that a lot of hot sauces or a lot of heat that you would add in a lot of Chinese food doesn't have the ability to do, because it doesn't have oil in it. So that's our sauce. All right. The very last thing that I'm going to do is assemble our cornstarch slurry here. So if you've watched one of these streams before, you'll know that a cornstarch slurry, it comes up in pretty much all Chinese cooking, or at least all Chinese stir fries like this. And that's because this is how we make thick sauces. So without the cornstarch, our wok fry would essentially be pretty loose and watery. And then once we add this cornstarch slurry, it's going to create a lot of thickness. So I associate it very similarly to the way that Italian food uses pasta water, is by adding that pasta water, which contains a lot of starch from the pasta. We do a similar thing in Chinese cooking, but instead of pasta water, we use cornstarch. Yeah. Oh, there's so many comments. Cool. Let's pop over. Trader Joe's in Canada. Oh yeah, Trader Joe's is the most American grocery store that I know of. It's Trader Joe's is very Americanized or American, not Americanized, but it's iconically American grocery, maybe iconically California American grocery store. But I love it because it's super cheap, so you could get really cheap pantry stuff at Trader Joe's. Their produce stuff maybe not so great, but pantry stuff really, really useful. Pasta, stuff like that. Yeah, unlike Whole Foods, yeah, I try not to go to Whole Foods. It's super expensive. But Whole Foods, sometimes it's a good source for things that you can't seem to find other places, which are a lot of niche stuff. I went to Whole Foods when I was trying to find some Impossible meat, which is the Whole Foods is the only place I could find that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the YouTube video of Chinese, I think that was a BuzzFeed video. I was just looking at that, actually. I'm pretty sure it's a BuzzFeed video, and it's a bunch of kids trying Panda Express for the first time, and all the kids say that they don't like it because they're looking for traditional Chinese food. But if you admit to the fact that Panda Express is not traditional Chinese food, which is fine, that's fine. It's actually really good because you just think of it as like basically honey glazed fried chicken, which is like really good. I don't see a problem with that. Yeah, cool. Yeah, Hermina, white pepper, it does contain some MSG, so it contains quite a bit of MSG, which is why I love using it in a lot of marinades, is because it kind of pervades through like that marinade and kind of cuts through a lot. Also because it's so powdered, you can, it like has a way of like getting into the marinade and like really like infusing into the chicken more than like if you were to use like cracked pepper, for example. I find that it doesn't work quite as well. You could also, if you can't find white pepper, just use some MSG, which I'm pretty sure you can find in most places now, which is going to do a pretty similar thing. Use it really, really sparingly, though. That stuff is really, really strong. He said, oh, might not be getting enough water. Oh, start out in a jar. Ooh, that's a good idea. Thank you, Sarah. That's really good. I'm going to try that. I have like probably 50 or so green onions that are pretty much useless because they don't have whites. Thank you for the tip. That's really useful, actually. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, Trader Joe's spreads. That's like the spot to go for spreads and snacks, granolas, stuff like that. Cool. So over on the stove, I'm heating my wok up. This is going to need to be very, very hot, so we want that thing preheating for a little bit. That's going to take I don't know, about like 2 minutes or so. We want it ripping hot before we start cooking. Also, opening up some window. Cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in to one of these streams, we're here streaming every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. PST. With new recipe videos, those are coming up over on the YouTube channel every Friday. Today we're making a Kung Pao chicken that's based off of a recipe hack that I had written, I think that was back in November or December on the YouTube channel, in which there was part of a larger series where I've been deconstructing a lot of foods that come from Chinese American cuisine. So that usually ends up being a lot of things from Panda Express, P.F. Chang's, things like Kung Pao chicken, Mongolian beef, General Tso's chicken, honey sesame chicken, stuff like that, and kind of taking a look at like those really iconically American Chinese foods. And taking a look at what it would look like for those if those dishes were not so Americanized. So very, very often what I find myself doing, usually in those videos I'll do two versions. So I'll do one version that's a straight ahead Panda Express hack or a P.F. Chang's hack. And then in that second version, usually what I'll do is deconstruct some of those like qualities about that Panda Express version or the P.F. Chang's version that make it very, very American, and see what it looks like if I were to reconstruct it without those things and replace them with ingredients that come from like really traditional Chinese cooking. So for example, today we removed a whole bunch of sugar from this particular recipe and replaced it with like sugar adjacent things. So today we used, there was some fish sauce, black vinegar, hoisin sauce, and hoisin sauce, yeah, and a little bit of brown sugar. I think we used a teaspoon or 2 teaspoons of brown sugar. And what that does is kind of like builds up like a more complexity of flavor and like complexity to that sweetness that's not just straight ahead sugar, and kind of like gets us in the world of like what traditional Chinese cooking would actually taste like, which is super interesting with things that like really come from like Americanized Chinese food. So like my favorite one is from the Panda Express menu where we did the Beijing beef, which is not Chinese at all. That's literally just not even American food. I would say that's just a Panda Express thing, which is essentially a deep fried Angus steak. I think it's Angus steak, and kind of like take a look at what it would look like if I tried to reimagine Panda Express's Beijing beef in the lens of like traditional Chinese cooking. So stuff like that, super fun to take a look at. If you're interested in stuff like that, definitely hop over to the YouTube channel and check out some of the content that's popping up over there. Lots of fun recipes. Those are out every Friday. So last Friday we did the popcorn chicken from Quickly, which is super fun. That's a Taiwanese popcorn chicken. And this Friday coming up is going to be, we're doing a chicken katsu. That's going to be super fun. So a lot of fried chicken lately. So if you haven't checked out some of that, definitely hop over to YouTube and check out what's going on over there. Yeah. Yeah, so if you're watching on Reddit, that would be the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, you're already there. Good job. Ooh. Alright, so before we start cooking, I'm actually gonna make a quick adjustment to my marinade here because I forgot / meant to add this earlier. I'm gonna add one more thing to our marinade here, and it's going to be about half a teaspoon of cornstarch. In a lot of wok cooking, especially with meats, that cornstarch is gonna be really, really important because it's going to prevent the chicken from overcooking. So since wok heat is so aggressive and hot, anytime that we add chicken to a wok, or any kind of meat really, it's going to have the quality about it that it's going to overcook very, very quickly because the heat is so aggressive. So very, very often in a lot of marinades, or even just like even if there is no marinade, you will see chicken just coated in cornstarch first. That's actually how Mongolian beef is made. Is adding a little bit of cornstarch first, and that's just going to prevent the chicken from overcooking super quickly. Salted egg yolk chicken. I would have to take a look at that. I have definitely worked with salted egg yolks. They are like, that is definitely an acquired taste, is those salted egg yolks. But yeah, I would definitely get into that. Cool. So if you're not sure if your wok is hot enough, the first sign that we're looking for is all of this heat. So I saw someone said it looked very, very angry. That heat is the smoke is very, very important. When you start seeing smoke coming off of your wok like that, it's a sign that it's nice and hot. If you're still not sure, get a wooden utensil. Very often you'll see Chinese chefs doing this with chopsticks, and stick it in the oil. And once it's in the oil, what you should see, if it's hot enough, are all of those bubbles boiling up around the wooden utensil. So if you don't see bubbles popping up, that means that the wok's not hot enough and you should just stop. But as long as you see those bubbles, that means that you're in the right place. Alright, so I'm adding my chicken to the wok, but I'm being very careful to hold back the liquid of our marinade as possible. The goal here is to reduce the amount of moisture that enters our wok. So this is there's quite a bit of moisture that's held back. We don't want that in the wok because if we the more moisture that we add to the wok, the more trouble we're going to have keeping the wok hot. So super useful to hold back as much of that liquid as possible, so that we can cook this chicken on high heat, or as high as possible. So I'm going to flash cook that. We're going to let that go for, that will probably take like a minute or two. And we're going to look for a good sear and like crisp to it. So before we let it sit, I'm going to spread everything and kind of give it an opportunity to sear. So we don't need a super deep sear, but I do like giving everything a little bit of an opportunity to sear. So I'm going to let that sit for about a minute, and it's going to develop a nice crisp exterior. And then once we have a nice crisp exterior, we can go ahead and start tossing. Yeah, what are we making? I think so, yeah. That's today we're making a Kung Pao chicken. So this particular version of Kung Pao chicken is one that I had written for a recipe hack that we were doing, hacking the Panda Express Kung Pao chicken. So the version that we're cooking today is deviates from the Kung Pao chicken that you would find at Panda Express a little bit, in that it's sort of like removing a lot of American qualities from the Panda Express version, which is the version that we're assembling today. So I call it the Wu Can Cook version. So if you're looking for it, you'll find the recipe. There it is. There's the recipe. So that's the recipe video that lives over on my YouTube channel. In those videos, we usually move a little bit slower, and I'll kind of like talk my way through some of the decision making that goes behind the recipe, and like why I add certain stuff, why I leave some things out, things like that comes up in those recipe videos a lot. Yeah. Delaware Smash. I found a wooden spatula. That's, yeah. I've been looking for one for a while. You definitely, like, the spatula is really, really useful in wok cooking. More often, so that's a good point. More often you will see chefs, they'll cook with things like this. So a metal spatula, which is super, super common in wok cooking. But the more that I've used that metal spatula, it started scratching my carbon steel, so it was chipping off some of the seasoning. So I had to stop using it, and I've been using a wooden spoon, which is really, really clumsy. So I did find a wooden spatula, and it's not scratching the wok. But I've been looking. I think I have been looking for one for like 3 or 4 months, so it took a while. Yeah, I'm glad someone noticed, though. I was super stoked when I found one. All right, so that's our chicken. This should be about. We don't need this chicken to be fully cooked. I would say this is about like 90% cooked. It's pretty close to being done. It's pretty close to being done. We're just going to remove it so that we can do a bit of batch cooking here. So I'm going to pull this out, and then we're going to set it aside, and then we're going to add it back to our wok once we're pretty much finished cooking our veggies. So back over on the stove, there's a lot of stuff going on here. Super, super important, though, before you move on and start cooking your other elements. We want to rinse out the wok and clean out all of that remnant stuff. So that remnant stuff, it contains a couple of things. Probably mostly what it contains is chicken fat. So that is all the rendered chicken fat that's coming off of the chicken thigh. It's kind of a bummer to be rinsing that off because that's all a bunch of flavor. So we actually want that in like the effort of like building flavor. But as we start batch cooking, it's super, super important to rinse that stuff off, because if we leave it behind, what's going to happen is it's all going to start burning, and then you're going to have burnt like marinade and burnt chicken, a lot of burnt stuff in your wok, and that's not going to be good. You're going to have a lot of problems with that once it starts burning. Yeah. So I'm rinsing it off, and then we're reheating our wok, and then we're going to move on to our veggies. Cool. Yeah. Oh, where do you get a wok like that? Yeah, good question. Lots of people ask about this wok. There's not really a lot that's special about this wok. I just got it at a restaurant supply store. I think I got it for like $10. What's really more important is the quality of metal that it's made out of. So this particular wok is made out of carbon steel, which I love because it seasons really nicely. If you're cooking on an electric range, I always recommend getting yourself a cast iron wok, because it's going to retain heat a little bit better, which is always going to be a problem on an electric range. I learned how to cook on a stainless steel wok, which was really useful. The only thing that I really recommend against is non-stick woks, which unfortunately is probably what like most big box stores are going to sell, non-stick woks, and I don't know why. But definitely those non-stick woks, you're going to have a lot of trouble getting them hot enough because they're non-stick. That's the quality about non-stick. Yeah, where did I find the wooden spatula? I found it at Target, actually. It's made by OXO. I couldn't believe that I found an OXO wooden spatula, because I had been looking for one for so long. And I have definitely looked in Target before for this thing and not found it. So, but yeah, I am super stoked that I finally found a wooden spatula. I haven't even I was not even able to find it in like Chinese like restaurant supply stores. So like the same place that I got this wok, I could not even find a wooden spatula because most Chinese stores, they don't use one like this. They use metal spatulas. All right, so up next, I'm adding my garlic in first, followed by my ginger, and finally the whites of my green onions. And then we're going to let that go for just long enough until they become fragrant. So we refer to this as the aromatic elements of our wok fry, for the obvious reason that they should be aromatic. So use your nose. When they start smelling, and once they are aromatic, once you start smelling garlic and ginger, you're ready to move on. Usually for me that's about 10 seconds, but yeah, use your nose at this point. All right, next up I'm adding, this is my zucchini. Anytime I work with zucchini, I love giving it a head start of maybe like a minute or two. I'm going to give it like maybe a minute. Maybe a minute and a half before we move on to our other ingredients. And that's because zucchinis are really, really durable veggies. which means that they take a little bit longer than those other veggies. So it's nice to give these a little bit of a head start so that they have an opportunity to really cook in that high heat before we start adding other stuff. Yeah, is the oil the sesame or peanut? So today I'm actually using grapeseed oil because I ran out of peanut oil today. But yeah, usually I've been in the habit of using peanut oil for wok frying. But really, any kind of oil that's good for high heat will work. So canola oil works really well. Vegetable oil, which is essentially what grapeseed oil is, will work really well. Peanut oil is probably the most traditional thing to use in a wok fry. I love using peanut oil because it tastes good. It has a flavor that's really appropriate for wok fries. But yeah, if you can't find peanut oil, really anything that has like a high smoke point will work. So definitely avoid things like olive oil. Avocado oil, I believe, has a high smoke point, so that would totally work. All right, so I just added my bell pepper, and we're going to let that go for maybe a minute or two. You will notice that the only vegetable that I have not yet added to my wok is my onions. We're going to hold those off for a very long time. They're going to go in super, super late here, specifically because onions are extremely delicate, so we don't want to add those too early because they'll fall apart. They will, if you add an onion too early, they will actually disappear because onions are made mostly of water. So if you add them really early, what will happen is it will just lose all of that water, and then it will literally disappear into your wok fry, and you just won't have onions anymore. So I love adding those onions really, really late and giving it like no more than like a minute or maybe 2 minutes in the wok heat. Any more than that, and they will start falling apart. Yeah, sesame would change the taste. The main reason that I don't cook with sesame oil is because it's really, really expensive. So I think this bottle of sesame oil that I have. So this is my sesame oil. Yeah, this is a $5.50 for this bottle of sesame oil, and this is a 16-ounce bottle of sesame oil. So it's really, really expensive. Sesame oil, as far as I know, is intended for finishing. So that's why people generally don't cook on it. But more importantly, it's also very, very biased. So it would definitely make everything taste like sesame, which in some cases is actually going to be pretty useful. In this case, good. Thank you for reminding me. I actually forgot the tangents. In this case, yeah, in this case, it would probably be a little bit overpowering. Slice Sister, thank you for reminding me. I actually forgot the tangent peppers, but we will absolutely be circling back to it. So really quick, these are tangent peppers. They are dry peppers, and they're like iconically associated to Kung Pao chicken. So it is a big crime to forget your tangent peppers in a Kung Pao chicken. I will say is that tangent peppers, they have to be added when the wok is empty, otherwise they won't release capsaicin. So normally what I would have done was added this really, really early, before the garlic and ginger even. But since I forgot, we're going to be walking backwards and doing a little bit more batch cooking than we normally would. Thank you for reminding me. That's a good catch. All right, so that's our veggies. Let's pull these out. Oops, wrong camera. So that's our chicken and veggies. We're going to set those aside, and before we add them back to the wok, I'm going to bloom my tangent peppers. So I'm reheating my wok here. We need that to be ripping hot before we start cooking again. One of the main reason why if you're wondering why I keep removing stuff from the wok, it is so that we can keep the wok hot. So if we were to add everything to the wok and just keep putting stuff in without removing it, you would have found that those veggies would probably ended up being pretty mushy. Or if we added the chicken after the veggies, the chicken would probably be pretty mushy and probably undercooked too. So that's a quality about a wok that is one of the main downsides of trying to wok cook on a home range, is that it has poor heat retention. So the more that we add to it, the more that it's going to drop in temperature. It's unavoidable on the heat potential of a home range. So the way that they get around that in a lot of restaurant cooking is that those restaurant wok burners are extremely hot. They burn hotter than any home range you will be able to find. in a home range, there is a solution to that. It's all essentially what we have to do is just remove stuff from the wok as we cook. So right now we're looking at two things that we've finished cooking. So in the red bowl, this is our chicken. In the silver bowl, this is our veggies. So we're removing that from the wok, and we're going to move on and cook the remainder of our ingredients. So at no point in time will everything be in the wok until the very, very end when we're essentially done cooking. All right, so I'm reheating my wok. We're again looking for all this smoke. And then we're going to do, in Chinese cooking, we call this a long yao, which is essentially adding cold oil to a hot wok. And that gives us this nice non-stick surface. Yeah. You were dying? Yeah, totally. All right, so in going in are my Tianjin peppers. Tianjin has a lot of capsaicin, obviously, because they're very spicy peppers. So if your windows aren't open yet, definitely make sure they're open now because it's going to make you cough if you're breathing in this smoke. But super, super important with Tianjin peppers, they're not going to taste like anything unless they make contact with that oil. So super, super important when you're cooking that stuff. The wok's got to be empty, otherwise it's not going to taste like anything. It's just going to be raw peppers. All right, last up I'm adding my onions. And then I'm going to give that a toss. We're going to give our onions maybe a minute before we move on and add everything back to the wok. Peanuts, not yet. The peanuts are slices to the peanuts are going to go in very, very last. I love adding the peanuts really, really late because if you add them too early, they sort of get mushy, which is like one of my biggest pet peeves with a lot of kung pao chickens that I've had. Is if you ever had a kung pao chicken and the peanut is like tender almost, it's like almost mushy, or sometimes it is mushy. That's because the peanuts went in too early. So I'm adding them really, really late. It's going to be the last thing that I add. And it kind of yields like a more crispy peanut so that you don't end up with like a really, really mushy bite. All right, I'm adding everything back to the wok now. This is our chicken and our veggies. And finally is our sauce. A couple of folks asked me about this earlier, a couple of days ago. But anytime that I'm cooking, especially in wok stir fries like this, you'll notice that I'm reserving a very large portion of the sauce here. So this is like almost half of the sauce. And the reason that I do that is so that we can monitor how saucy the stir fry is. So if you've ever very, very often you'll see me, I'll hold that off, and sometimes I don't add it, and that's because I want to make sure that we don't over season. So if it needs it, we can finish with it, but if it doesn't need it, don't add it. Don't feel bad about dumping it. And my wok fry is pretty saucy already, so I don't think that it's going to need all of it. Right. So last up is our peanuts. You could also do like cashews. Very often I see people use cashews for kung pao chicken. That will work too. Probably you could use like almonds. Really any kind of nut will work. I love using honey roasted peanuts. I think it just gives it a little bit more crunch. Probably more traditionally you would see the use of raw peanuts though. And last up is our cornstarch slurry. And that's going to create some nice thickness to our sauce here. I think this might actually need the rest of this. I'd like this to be a little bit looser than it actually is. So I'm adding this is a tiny bit of water, and that's going to loosen up the sauce a little bit. And that ought to do it. Alright, so the last thing that you want to do anytime that we finish wok cooking, you will see, if you've ever watched one of these streams before, I pretty much at the end of every stream say this. But the last thing we want to do anytime that we're cooking in a wok is clean the wok. Super, super important is that while that wok is hot, you'll notice my wok is pretty much clean already. And I didn't really do anything. All I did was I rinsed it off. I rinsed it in the sink. No scrubbing, I didn't have to do anything. Pretty much everything just came off with a good rinse, I'd say. I see one or two things going on in the wok right now, but otherwise it's pretty much clean already. And that's because while the wok is hot, it has this very, very nice non-stick surface to it. So if you clean it while it's hot, pretty much everything will just come right off. But if you try and clean that wok while it's cold, so if you were to sit down, eat, and then come back and try and clean the wok, all of that stuff is going to stick to it, and you're going to have to start doing things that you don't really want to be doing in a wok, like scrubbing and like getting sponges out and steel wool, stuff like that. All things that will probably be okay, but you want to try and minimize that as much as possible, because eventually what will happen is you will start scrubbing off the seasoning of your wok, which is terrible. That's the most important part about your wok, is that seasoning. So, and just like a cast iron pan, I'm coating this in a little bit of oil on all sides, and that's going to prevent any kind of rusting. That's it. Now your wok is ready to use again. Yeah. Deglaze the wok. Oh yeah, that's probably a good idea. I don't particularly like doing that deglazing in carbon steel woks because I've found that when you deglaze in a carbon steel wok, you see that it's actually happening a little bit already. Let's see if we can use the zoom. No, it's not going to work. It's actually happening a little bit already, but when you try and deglaze a carbon steel wok, what will happen is you'll probably start deglazing a little bit of the seasoning, and it doesn't deglaze cleanly. So what you're going to end up with is like little bits and like black flakes that come off from the seasoning, which I don't like because it kind of like muddies up the sauce. So I love deglazing in like stainless steel pans, for example, because it comes off cleanly. But yeah, the more that I've deglazed in woks, the more that I've discovered is that it doesn't deglaze quickly. All right. So those tangent peppers, if you want, you could probably pick them out right now. I don't generally bother, but they're not edible, so don't try and eat those. They're dried peppers, so they're not going to be edible. Really, all of the flavor that we're going to get out of them has come out already. But lots of people like to leave them in because they're nice for presentation too. So. Tasty. Yeah, oh, we forgot one thing. Let's pull this camera down. Forgot the most important part. I'm adding, this is going to be a little bit of Szechuan peppercorn. If you're doing this properly, that Szechuan peppercorn it should be ground in a mortar and pestle. That's actually just a pepper grinder, which will work fine too. But I love doing it in a mortar and pestle because it'll break down some of those peppercorns a little bit better. It is actually one of the more important ingredients of this dish, and I can't believe I forgot it, but it will give it a nice bit of heat though. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, potatoing, that's a good username. Frisbee Boss, good question. Yeah, for the cornstarch slurry, the proportions. So the proportions are not actually that important. What's really important is how much cornstarch is in it and that it is dissolved in water. So I usually don't bother measuring, but I like as a good standard probably equal parts of cornstarch and water. But what's more important is that the cornstarch has enough water to dissolve. So the reason that you don't just add cornstarch to a wok fry to thicken it up is because cornstarch has a capacity or a habit of clumping up with literally anything. So if you were to just add cornstarch straight to the wok, it would probably stick to like everything. It would stick to the veggies, it would stick to the chicken, it would stick to like the bean sauce, literally everything. And I have learned this the hard way. The only way to dissolve cornstarch is in pure water. If you put it in anything else, it will clump up. So the main reason that we're adding it to water is just so that it doesn't clump up. So it's not really that important, the relative like proportions of water to cornstarch, as long as we make sure that the cornstarch is not a solid. So we're trying to make sure that it is a liquid form when it goes in, and that's going to create like that thickening agent. So you could think of it as like pasta water. So we wouldn't just add pasta starch to a pasta carbonara, for example. It has to be mixed with water so that it is able to develop like a cohesive sauce. Yeah, Szechuan peppers. Szechuan peppers is very, I wouldn't say they're super spicy. They're like a particular kind of spice though. So if you're not familiar with it, Szechuan peppercorn is the kind of heat that you would associate with probably most Szechuan food. And it has a numbing quality to it. I actually don't think it's that hot. I think it is very numbing. And it has that quality about it that is like the thing that we associate with a lot of Szechuan food, which is actually why I think it's so important to a lot of stir fries. Is if you're trying to like call on that like cuisine of Szechuan food, you have to use Szechuan peppercorn. But I actually don't think it's that hot, which is why there are so many other sources of heat in this dish, including the spicy chili flake and the tangent peppers, both of which are going to get probably more heat from those two things rather than the Szechuan peppercorn. But definitely that quality of Szechuan food is coming from the Szechuan peppercorn for sure. Yeah, yeah, totally. The way of the chopsticks, yeah. So people have been asking me about chopsticks a lot. Oh, I forgot the green peppers. Forgot the chives too. People have been asking about chopsticks too, but like, so I would say like the number one thing that I think like a lot of people don't realize, this is only true for Chinese food. I can't speak for other cuisines, but definitely in Chinese food, if you've ever been to like a Chinese restaurant and seen like the old Chinese people eating, they never eat like this. So very, very often I see people trying to eat like this and then bringing, like you would with a fork, so picking something up and then bringing it to your face like this. It's really hard to do. You can do it, but you're gonna have to eat really, really slowly. And it's really, really hard to do because it takes a lot of dexterity and a lot of practice, where like, for the most part, when you watch Chinese people eat, they don't generally do that. What they will do, more likely, is pick the bowl up and then you shovel stuff into your mouth with the chopsticks, like this. And that's generally how you eat really, really fast with chopsticks, is by picking the bowl up. So like the number one tip that I tell people when they're trying to learn how to use chopsticks is, it's not actually about the chopsticks, it's about the plate that you're eating off of, or the bowl that you're eating off of. The reason that Chinese people use rice bowls is because you can't do that with a flat plate. So you can't pick up a flat plate and then shovel stuff into your mouth from that flat plate. You're gonna have a lot of trouble. Anytime you're in a Chinese restaurant, most often what you'll see, at the very most, if you're eating family style, you'll see people serve stuff to the flat plate and then put it into the rice bowl from the flat plate and then eat out of the rice bowl. But if you're trying to eat off of a flat plate with chopsticks, you're going to have a lot of trouble because it takes a lot of dexterity. I know for sure that Korean people and Japanese people don't do a similar thing with a rice, or don't always do the similar thing with a rice bowl. I know for sure that Japanese or Korean food does not do that because Korean food uses metal chopsticks and they're flat, which is why when I eat like Korean food, I have a lot of trouble using the chopsticks there because I don't know how to use chopsticks like that. It's very strange. Yeah. Yeah, emergency water. I'm a Taiwanese American here in Oakland. My Chinese is really rusty though, so sorry if I misread that. Oh, Frisbee. Yeah, Frisbee boss. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Good question. Thank you for asking. Yeah, shoveling food into your face. That's how you eat Chinese food for sure. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, while the food is still hot. Yeah, sometimes I forget to take a bite. Yeah, Balboa. Yeah, Balboa for sure. Very often at many many Korean restaurants and definitely some Japanese restaurants. Japanese restaurants not so much because you're usually eating sushi, but definitely a lot of Korean restaurants. I have asked for a fork because it's not that I don't know how to use a chopstick. It's just that it's way easier and just you can eat faster. So, and like especially if I'm eating something that's out of a flat plate, it's almost impossible because you're just gonna have to eat so slow and it's gonna be so frustrating. Yeah. Cool. All right, thanks everyone. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. If you haven't hopped over to the YouTube channel, definitely check out what's going on over there. In addition to the concurrent live stream, that would be the laptop behind me. That's also where all of the recipe videos live, so if you're trying to cook the things that I'm cooking, that's a good place to go. This particular Kung Pao chicken crust hack that I had written for the channel, I think that was back in October or November, something like that. And that was part of another series that I've been doing where I've been hacking a lot of Chinese American cuisines. So things like Kung Pao chicken, but there's actually a lot more Americanized things. Probably the most recent thing was Mongolian beef from P.F. Chang's. And just generally taking a look at like what Chinese American food is and like what makes it so American. So especially with things like Kung Pao chicken, I find that there are a lot of sugar elements and just generally like sauce elements that are turned all the way up. And that's super interesting to me because I don't actually know that much about Chinese American food. But I know lots of stuff about like traditional Chinese food and like how that's assembled. So it's really interesting. Usually in that series, what I'll do is I'll like apply a knowledge of like traditional wok cooking and see what it would look like to reassemble a like really, really Americanized dish like General Tso's chicken or honey sesame chicken, things that you find at Panda Express, and reassemble it in the lens of like traditional wok cooking. And what would those dishes look like if they were traditional Chinese food, which is really interesting with some things like honey sesame chicken, for example, which is really just honey glazed fried chicken, American honey glazed fried chicken, and like taking a look at what that would look like. I think the version of that I had done, I think I did like a tempura batter or something like that. In this particular version, we did a couple of things to remove the American qualities. Probably the number one thing is that I removed a whole bunch of sugar. And probably the number two thing that was so interesting is that we used spicy black bean paste, which if you've had Chinese food is probably more commonly associated with dajangmian. And it kind of gives us like that like interesting like flavor that comes from traditional like Chinese wok cooking that you probably will not find the use of black bean paste in most Americanized Chinese food. If you do find it in Chinese American food, it's probably drawn very, very heavily from traditional Chinese food because most American people do not eat Chinese black bean paste. So stuff like that all lives over on the YouTube channel. If you haven't checked out some of those stuff, definitely hop over and check out what's going on over there. There's lots of fun stuff coming up. New recipes, those are out every Friday. So last Friday we did the Taiwanese popcorn chicken from Quickly, which was super, super fun. This coming Friday, coming up, is going to be chicken katsu. So we did a chicken katsu plate, which is really, really tasty. Lots of stuff like that. So if you're interested in things like that, definitely hop over. I know people like to hop over and just like binge watch those. You could totally binge watch those. There's probably like 3 or 4 hours of Woo Can Cook content now. So I know people do that. You can watch me chop stuff for 3 hours. That's totally fine. People like to watch it while studying, I guess. So. Cool. Yeah. Oh, potato. What are we cooking tomorrow? That is a good question. I have a phone in front of me so I can look. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Tomorrow we're making a fried rice, so that you very often, if you see me eating a stir fry, probably the next thing that I'm going to be cooking is a fried rice. So tomorrow we're making bacon fried rice, which is always those fried rices will always follow a day where we cook something stir fried, because they can only be made with leftover rice. So tomorrow we're making bacon fried rice because we're going to have leftover rice today. So. Oh yeah, Jill, thank you. Yeah, my brother just, that's a good question. Lots of people ask where the leftovers go. My brother just had a baby, so he's getting all the leftovers. She's like 3, 4 months, 5 months old now? I lost track. I think she's 5 or 6 months old now. Yeah, double dipping with chopsticks, yeah. I think like the go-to move, if you don't want to double dip, is you have to flip it over. So I usually mainly just do that with hot pot. Is you flip it over and then use the back side of the chopsticks, which is really hard to do because they're not very dexterous. Or like if you're really into it, like if you're really at hot pot, you can also boil them in the soup base. Yeah. Oh, RKK6, yeah, thanks for tuning in. Oh, you joined late. You made it though. You made it just in the nick of time. Yeah, Frisbee Boss. Yeah, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Yeah, thank you. I'm super excited for my new niece. Cool. Yeah, you want to see the shovel? Yeah, the shovel happens. If you've ever watched any Chinese food in any like movie, that's how they eat. So they put the bowl up to their mouth, and then you shovel with the chopsticks going into your mouth. Usually you would do it with a smaller bowl. So most often you would see like a rice bowl like this size, and then you move stuff into your mouth with the chopsticks. So I call it shoveling. It is like, I guess, like, objectively speaking, it's pretty bad table manners because you're literally picking a dish up off of the floor and off of the table and like shoveling stuff into your mouth. So, but that's how Chinese food is eaten for sure. So, so that's probably like usually when I go to restaurants and I see like white people eating Chinese food, that's probably the biggest problem that I see them having, is that they're trying to eat the stuff like off of the plate, which is very, very hard to do. The only other solution that I found is if the rice has a lot of starch in it and then it clumps up, and you can pick up clumps of rice. Cool. Yeah, cool. All right, thanks guys. My name is Wesley, this is Wu Can Cook. If you haven't yet, definitely hop over to the YouTube channel and give that a subscribe. We're working our way to 2,700 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you haven't yet, definitely give that a subscribe. If you're not interested, don't subscribe. I don't know why people subscribe when they aren't interested. That's kind of weird. But new recipes, those are coming out every Friday, so lots of fun stuff coming up soon. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bacon fried rice coming tomorrow. I'll see you soon. Oh, I'll be around doing dishes too, so if you have any questions, if I miss something, feel free and repeat yourself. I know I miss questions all the time, so feel free and repeat. I'll see you soon.
Slow. Come over and start up a conversation with just me, and trust me, I'll give it a chance. Now take my hand, stop, and the man on the jukebox, and then we start to dance. And now I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Well, come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me. Say, boy, let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Well, come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead. I'm in love with the shape of you. We push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too. I'm in love with your body. Last night you were in my room, and now my bedsheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with your body. 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 in love with the shape of you. One weekend, we let the story begin. We're going out on our first date. You and me are thrifty, so go all you can eat. Fill up your bag and I fill up your plate. We talk for hours and hours about the sweet and the sour and how your family's doing okay. And leaving, getting a taxi, kissing the backseat, tell the driver make the radio play. And I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me. Say, boy, let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead. I'm in love with the shape of you. Push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too. I'm in love with your body. Last night you were in my room. Now my bedsheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with your body. 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 Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the shape of you. Come on, be my baby, come on. 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 Come on, be my baby, come on.
Think I'll dust them off, put them back up on the shelf. Case my little baby girl is in need. Am I coming out of that